Go ahead and please take your seat. My name is David Doré, and I'm the president of the Downtown Campus, and I'd like to welcome everyone to the Downtown Campus and this very historic summit that we're having. And our MC for this morning is going to be our provost, and it is my honor now to introduce our provost, Dr. Dolores Duran-Cerda.
Good morning, buenos días y bienvenidos. Welcome. How are you? Yeah, are we excited about today? Yes, excellent. My name is Dolores Duran-Cerda, and as Dr. Dure said, I'm the acting provost here at Pima Community College. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining us this morning and being a part of this historic occasion for Pima Community College and the Ethnic, Gender, and Transborder Studies Summit. Ethnic studies, gender, and transborder programs are integral to an understanding of diversity of heritages in the United States. For instance, and especially in the Southwest, Mexican-American studies is integral to the study of American identity and history. Ideally, every student should be aware of that fact. Such programs are designed to lead to a greater understanding of the histories and cultures of the peoples here, and not to any partisan political or cultural outcome. To quote our keynote speaker, Dr. Alejandro Lugo, we cannot understand society without understanding borders. Borders are not just physical. They exist in and between several social institutions, such as race and gender, and especially now in the political climate that we are in. Next, I would like to introduce and welcome Nyona Smith, who will perform our opening ceremony this morning. Ms. Smith is a proud Tohono O'odham and recent author of the book Plants That Heal, Conserving Indigenous Knowledge. Ms. Smith also enjoys teaching kindergarten in Green Valley, educating people about her culture and language, traveling, and powwow dancing as a jingle dress dancer throughout the United States. So let's welcome Ms. Smith.
Kukseadik, Anya Jigik Nyona Smith, Hun Autumn Jigik Iwakahat, Anya Puton Autumn, Hun Sapantat Maptiju, Itada Apim, Iya Autumn Majuatka. Sapantat up Mamta Moju, Mamta Mohai Cho Marsham, Iya, Hun Ogap Jigik, Lester Smith, Hun Jugap Jigik, Diane Jesus, Hun Huudbat up Jigik, Melissa Jesus, Hun Babat up Jigik, Silas Jesus, Hunya Gakbat up Jugik, Laura Joaquin, Kunya Waskbat up Jugik, Arnold Smith, Junhama, Anya put Donna Autumn, Ida Siadik Mamta Moju, to Haicho Marstam, to Mom Skukamo Haicho Marstam, up a Mujid Haichu Nantko Mas Autumn, Upoma Skuk Hoikut Api Musich. Hobi Igo Amjud. Hello, good morning. My name is Nyona Smith. I'm a proud member of the Donna Autumn Nation. I am very happy to be here, and I'm very happy to introduce myself and where I come from and my family. And today I will be blessing you all with one of our traditional songs, and it talks about the morning and the sunrise. Talks about the East and how we bring good blessings to our lands, not only to our lands, but to our people too. And then I like to also welcome you all to Jukshan, Tucson. And I want to also remember and give thanks to our water also and our lands here. And then the educators, not only the educators, but the people who help protect the lands here in Jukshan and all over the U.S. Then I also would like to share a song one song, and then another song. It's a water protector song, and I had the blessing to travel all over, and this summer I got to travel and help educate and open up a school. It's the Sacred Stone School, and I would like to give honor and remembrance of our water protectors, and then sing a song, and that song talks about Mother Earth and to protect our water, and water is sacred. So yes, I'll be honoring and singing those songs, and welcome once again, welcome, and may you all bring knowledge to not only yourselves, but bring knowledge to the people and educate the people in what you're going to learn today. So thank you, and may you please stand. Sharing ta yo I toi ka ki wa kinyai na him. Sharing ta yo I toi ka ki wa kinyai na him. Si ko sa pi ta ham ta hai I toi ka ki wa kinyai na him. Sharing ta yo I toi ka ki wa kinyai na him. Si ko sa pi ta ham ta hai I toi ka ki wa kinyai na him. Sharing ta yo I toi ka ki wa kinyai na him. Si ko sa pi ta ham ta hai I toi ka ki wa kinyai na him. Sharing ta yo I toi ka ki wa kinyai na him. Si ko sa pi ta ham ta hai I toi ka ki wa kinyai na him. Sharing ta yo I toi ka ki wa kinyai na him. Si ko sa pi ta ham ta hai I toi ka ki wa kinyai na him. Thank you. And this song was composed by the Cheyenne River Drum Group. And this is a song, it's a water protector song, and I just want to give honor and thanks to the water protectors who are still doing their jobs, and right now they're marching in Washington, D.C., so I just want to remember them like that and honor them with that song, so thank you. And this one, the language was the Lakota Sioux, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Nayona, for joining us today and opening the program. We'd like to present to you a certificate in appreciation of your attendance and participation in today's events. And Yolanda is going to be helping with that. So if you'd like to step forward, please. So it says, in appreciation of Nayona Smith, in participation in service in the Promoting Excellence in Social Justice Education, Ethnic, Gender, and Transborder Studies Summit. Thank you, Ms. Smith. Before we proceed, I'd like to take a moment to recognize some of our special guests, and a big shout out to Julian Easter, Assistant Vice Chancellor of Academic Affairs. Raise your hand, Julian. Where are you? There he is in the back. Yay! Lorenzo Lopez, who's Director of Culturally Relevant Pedagogy and Instruction at TUSD. Lorenzo, are you here? Thank you. Dr. Ana Ochoa O'Leary, Department Head of Mexican American Studies at the University of Arizona. Dr. Ana O'Leary, is she here yet? She'll be coming. So yay for Dr. Ana. Alma Ubeta, Development Manager at the Pima Community College Foundation. Alma? We'll give her a round of applause. Thank you. Dr. David Duray, whom you met earlier, President of the Downtown and Northwest Campuses. I know he's here. Yay. Dr. Lorraine Morales, Campus President at Community and East Campuses. Yay. Students and their teachers from 3 different high schools, Desert View, Palo Verde, and Talotecali. Students from Gila Ridge High School will be joining us via streaming later this morning. So are the students here? Yes, thank you for coming. Woo-hoo. Additionally, a special thank you to the many sponsors, work group members, volunteers, and other supporters of today's event. Your belief in the importance of ethnic, gender, and transborder studies in the community has made this event possible. And finally, Pima Community College Chancellor Lee Lambert is also an ardent supporter of ethnic, gender, and transborder studies. Though he's unable to join us this morning, he will be present to address the summit later this afternoon, so you'll have an opportunity to meet him if you haven't already. In addition, we are very fortunate today to have the support of the chair of the Pima Board of Governors, Mark Hanna, representing District 1. He is here today to welcome us to the summit. Mark earned an associate degree in education from Pima Community College and his bachelor's and master's degrees in higher education from the University of Arizona. He has served as a member of the PCC Foundation Board, is an officer of the University of Arizona Hillel Board of Directors, and of course, is chair of our Pima Community College Board of Directors. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Mark Hanna.
All right, thank you, Dolores. And so I couldn't start without making mention of a certain announcement that happened yesterday. So I would like everybody in the room who is a Pima Community College employee to stand up. If you're a Pima Community College employee, I want to say to each and every one of you, thank you for the work that you did and continue to do to lift us from the HLC sanctions, and in the long run, in the bottom line, is what we have done to help our students be better students and graduate from Pima Community College, go on to the university or wherever it is they're headed to. Thank you. Thank all of you. So, a round of applause. Okay, so on behalf of the Pima Community College Governing Board, I welcome you to the Ethnic, Gender, and Transborder Studies Summit. What a really exciting event. You know, we had an exciting announcement yesterday, exciting event today, and well, most people simply read the headlines that are full of refugee bans, anti-Semitic acts, deportations, denial of transgender rights, and unequal and unfair treatment of women and minorities. You are doing something about it. And what you are doing is absolutely the most effective thing anyone can do to combat ignorance and hatred. You are supporting education. I could not be prouder of the efforts of Dr. Francisca James Hernandez and Dr. Rosalia Solorzano and all the others involved in creating programs and courses that nurture our students' understanding and appreciation of themselves and of people who are different than they are. So, people always say, you know, we get in conversations these days and people say, well, let's not get political, let's not talk political. Well, you know what? We have to talk political. I mean, that is what's going on in our country, and we must talk political. And I truly believe that what is happening politically in our nation right now is the real fear for people who look like me, all right? Old white guys, all right? That our centuries of dominance is finally about to end. And we're scared, all right? That fear manifests itself in heightened racism, sexism, classism, homophobia, and xenophobia. My personal fear is what will be my legacy? What is going to be my legacy? What am I going to leave when I leave this planet? Will it be trying to perpetuate the status quo that I know is a losing proposition? Or will it be doing something to help everyone be prepared to live in the new status quo, where respect for others is valued above all else? So that's why I'm speaking to you this morning. That's why I'm here. I want that new status quo for myself, for my children, for my wonderful grandchildren, and for you. That is why I am so glad that you are here creating that new status quo through education. Thank you for being here, and thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you, Mark, for your continued support of our community, and also Ethnic, Gender, and Transborder Studies and Pima Community College. If you would like to approach the podium again, we'd like to present a certificate to you as well. Before we begin the panel discussion, I'd like to give you a brief overview of today's activities. This morning, we'll begin with a panel discussion with me as a moderator. We'll also have a keynote address followed by 6 panelists. There will be a short break after the first 3 panelists. Following the last 3 panelists and a Q&A session, we'll have a student showcase, some announcements, and then a break for lunch, and music by Gertie and the T.O. Boys on the outside patio. Our afternoon workshop then begins at about 1 o'clock, and the purpose of which is to get your ideas into the creation of a Center for Excellence for Ethnic, Gender, and Transborder Studies at Pima. We greatly appreciate those of you who have committed to being here the full day and participating in this workshop. Following the first part of the workshop, Chancellor Lee Lambert will be here to provide a welcome, and then join us to hear the reports from the workshop groups and engage in Q&A before the closing ceremony. So as you can see, we have a wonderful lineup of scholars, authors, student activists presenting this morning. These presentations are think pieces, to showcase some of the multiple dimensions of ethnic, gender, and transborder studies, and to help prepare and inspire all of you in this afternoon's workshop. Our panelists have been asked to reflect on ethnic, gender, and/or transborder studies from a personal and professional perspective, including the following. How have you seen it contribute to students' education and community well-being? What are the achievements and benefits to students and communities? What have been and likely will be the challenges and obstacles of their continued existence and growth? What do you think is the greatest opposition and supports for institutionalizing any of the ethnic, gender, transborder studies disciplines in Arizona? What do you think are the major lessons learned from the experience of establishing an EGTS discipline at your institution? How do you think we at Pima College can collaborate with you, your discipline, and your institution? What do you think are the advantages and disadvantages to forming a center of excellence, especially with respect to ethnic, gender, and transborder studies? So, in your summit packet is a handout with the biographies of all of today's speakers and presenters. I refer you to this handout for more complete information about each panelist. We do have a tight schedule, so we want to keep things moving, so I probably won't be telling you very many descriptions about the bios, but you have them there with you. Okay. So, we are very excited and honored to have Dr. Alejandro Lugo here to kick off the presentations with a keynote address. His presentation is called Cruces, Border Crossings, and Other Visual Journeys. As a social, cultural anthropologist who specializes in the study of culture, gender, and history at the U.S.-Mexico border, his research and teaching interests cover such areas as border theory, Latino studies, colonialism, capitalism, and cultural production and transformation in the context of transnationalism and globalization. So I would now like to introduce Dr. Lugo.
Good morning. Buenos dias. It's a real honor for me to be here, and I would like to thank, well, all of you for being here first. Thank you. Without an audience, right, there wouldn't be an event. But definitely the organizers, Dr. Francisca James Hernandez and Dr. Rosalia Solorzano, and the other colleagues that I met actually a few months ago when I visited PCC to talk about possible projects. And I would like to thank the provost as well, and and the board of directors chair. And I really would like to echo what you had to say, Mr. Hanna. I really endorse that, of course. And now I was given only 20 minutes to give my address, and I decided to divide it into two parts. Okay, the first part, which would be the first 10 minutes or so, would be about my own personal and professional experience, my autobiography, if you will, in relation to my education. And then the second part would be a slide presentation of my most recent work, which I believe captures what it means to do transborder research, okay, as a scholar. And also, the visual presentation would be my way of honoring the artists, okay, in our communities, and the student artists that I know are here. So please bear with me. Now, as the director of the School of Transborder Studies at ASU, I can tell you that it's extremely exciting to be invited to come here and talk about transborder issues and in relation to gender and ethnicity, for sure. But what that means for me is that PCC is actually the cutting edge and will be and is taking ownership of the leadership in higher education. Okay? So what we are here to talk about, it seems to me, is not just about what Arizona needs or what Tucson needs or what community colleges need. What we're talking about here today is about the future of higher education in general. And also, therefore, we're talking about the future of society. So that's huge, you know. And my own biography, as you'll see, covers different institutions, because I did end up going to different universities for my own training, to 3 universities in particular, right? But I also have taught in 4 other universities, both private and public, small and large. And it's interesting that I just came to ASU 2 years ago to direct the School of Transborder Studies. And that tells you that after all those years, 20 years, 30 years of my life in higher education, why did it come so just recently that Transborder Studies was being focused as a project? And it seems to me that I had to go to all of those universities and teach at all of those other universities to be trained myself in Transborder Studies. You see, it took my whole lifetime, my whole career, to be able to speak comfortably about not just border studies, but transborder studies. Transborder studies involves the simultaneity and the intersectionality of different borders of all kinds, class, gender, race, sexuality. And this is not just a mantra. We're not just talking about political correctness. We're talking about social life and people's lives and institutions. Okay, so this is what we're talking about. So this today and this morning, please keep that in mind, that as I talk about, you know, stories that have to do with me, they're not personal only. They're actually social and political and educational, okay? So that's already like 3 minutes, right, out of that. But I want you to please be aware of that. So to imagine a Center for Excellence on Ethnic, Gender, and Transborder Studies, you know, it's something that most universities are still not doing, and it would take probably decades to, you know, to do. So again, you're at the cutting edge, okay, and this is great. Now, I was born in Ciudad Juárez, Mexico, and I was raised on both sides of the border, in Las Cruces in particular. That's where I went to school first, but you know, actually in a very stable way. But in Juárez, I was there until I was 11 years old, so I became a real Mexican kid who learned the, you know, Mexican national anthem y todo eso, right? All the way through. But then I came to the United States. My father brought us here after many years of him being a bracero. And actually, we came to Arizona, to Yuma, to Gadsden. So I went to Gadsden Elementary School, you know, in 5th grade, and then again in 7th grade. But then we settled in Las Cruces, New Mexico. So it's been 40 years. It took about 40 years for me to come back to Arizona. And I have a story that I wrote up, you know, that I might get to later on in the day. An issue that I bring up today, I know we will be addressing throughout the day in different workshops, okay? So there will be more room and space to elaborate and explain a lot of what I'll be talking about. I was a migrant farm worker as a little kid, but I grew up as an urban kid in Ciudad Juárez. So I went from the urban to a rural. That border crossing from urban to rural, when I was a teenager, those are border crossings of all kinds, mental, psychological, physical, you name it, okay? Very powerful idea to think about life and society in the context of transborder issues. So in Las Cruces, I ended up then going to New Mexico State for my bachelor's. And I was, like most young people, right, thinking about going to college to get a degree that would allow me to earn money and make money for my family and for myself. But then I encountered anthropology one summer. And it was just so incredibly, you know, powerful. The professor who was an Irish-American professor, there were no Latino professors or Chicano professors in anthropology until later on in my career. Okay, so this is me, young, you know, Chicano, Mexicano, immigrant, all of those things. So anthropology, the study of culture across time and space, through its focus on everyday life, I thought, oh my God, I didn't know you could study those things. Right? So I took a class and then another one in the fall and then another one in the spring, and then I changed majors from business to anthropology. And yeah, so that's so there's so many border crossings, right? I mean, you don't think about that as border, changing from one discipline, changing majors, right? You think like, oh my God, that's horrible. Well, not necessarily, right? I mean, it's just amazing. But then I knew I wanted to be an anthropologist to become a professor someday because I like what the professor was doing in the classroom, and he had changed my life. I would go home and talk about what I was learning at school. And I thought, oh, okay, I would like it. So then Dr. Blake said, Alejandro, well, but you're going to have a PhD to do this. Well, what do I need to do, right? So anyway, to make a long story short, I ended up going to University of Wisconsin-Madison for my PhD degree. I got my master's there, so I'm a Badger, right, an Aggie and a Badger. But then, New Mexico State at the time, this is like 30 years ago, or 35, a long time ago, okay? But in the 80s, nobody was teaching about gender or feminism, at least not at MSU. And it was at Madison where I was introduced to what I call Marxism, feminism, and bagels. Bagels, I had not had bagels, and I had never been, in the Midwest ever. But Blake had been there, you see, so I felt like at home. And then, but all the professors were white, right? And they were not as kind as Dr. Blake was. But, Madison was like the Mecca in the 60s, actually, of what used to be like the really social movement and social protest. So students were protesting on campus the presence of the U.S. in Nicaragua and Central America. And then I began to be marching on the streets of Madison, so I became more politicized. So education made a big difference for me. But then at Madison, I got my master's then, and I almost finished my PhD degree there. But I missed, I thought, well, then I read some, Chicano anthropologists, Renato Rosaldo's work, who was at Stanford, Jose Limon's work, who was at Austin. Guys, right? These are guys. The gender, I had not thought about gender yet, that I was not reading female, Chicana feminists. That was later. So Madison at the time was, did very well with, gender, class, race more or less. But then sexuality was not being taught. And people were still like, whispering about somebody being gay or not straight. And I was myself kind of homophobic. I grew up Catholic. I was a conservative, culturally conservative kind of person. And education matters. That's what I'm telling you, right? And even, there was no internet at the time, right? So it's not, the education was when you go to school, the teachers that you have, and and then I began to wonder, well, what kind of training did the teachers had? Who were their professors, in other words? And I began to understand that it was going to be really hard to then change the curriculum, right? Because a lot of what we do as teachers, educators, we get it from our own training. So anyway, I ended up applying to Stanford because that's where Renato Rosaldo was, and I said, look, I was accepted, so that was great. And I said, but I'll go there only if Renato Rosaldo, who was doing work on the study of not just cultural patterns and power, but cultural borderlands. And he had been influenced by Gloria Anzaldúa. Okay? But Gloria Anzaldúa's work was published in 1987, and I went to Stanford in 1988. Everybody was really excited about Gloria Anzaldúa's book, and she used to be at Santa Cruz. But so once I was at Stanford, again, I went there because at Madison, there was nobody else I could work with, I felt. My professors were, again, good. Most of them were really good. I'm very proud of my training. But then at Stanford, I had like at least one Chicano professor, right, and then there were a lot of feminist scholars, Silvia Yanagisaku, Asian American, Japanese American, and many Mexicans who were actually very critical of issues of power. So my education expanded, and think about what it took me to get that kind of education about the richness of transborder analysis of society. Incredible, right? So all of that is happening here in one day, okay? And I want you to realize that. And then I went to the field to do my research among factory workers, maquiladora workers in Ciudad Juarez. So I went home. In Madison, I thought I was going to have to do the anthropology of, actually of India. Or I actually learned Quechua, because I wanted to go to Peru. But then I read Patricia Fernandez Kelly's ethnography on the maquiladoras. in Apar Juarez, and I thought, oh, wow, I mean, that's about home. My sisters, I have 5 sisters, and three of them have worked in the maquiladoras. So then I thought, oh, wow, I mean, I have a lot to say about maquiladoras. So then I did my research, doctoral research, okay, in Juarez, and my book, which actually, you know, it deals with a lot of those questions that I'm talking about here, addresses my ethnography, my methodology, but again, all of that is a product of my education. So my first teaching job, okay, was at a Bryn Mawr College, a women's college, you know, like the Big Ten, right? There's like the 7 sisters. And because I was trained on gender as a guy, Chicano, I'm heterosexual, right? And people, I say it right because, again, identities matter, right? And queer theory emerges in my training at Stanford very clearly. And, but people, there were all kinds of assumptions about who I was, right? Like, why would a Chicano, probably macho guy, right, would be teaching courses on gender? To all women at Bryn Mawr, and it was just really interesting. Then I was invited to teach at the University of Texas at El Paso. And all of that while I'm writing my dissertation, and I have 2 daughters by then, and my wife is here. Without her, I wouldn't be able to do what I did. Thank you, Martina. So, you know, so I fell in love in the process, obviously, right? So, so that's a border crossing, emotional one, right? From single to being a married person. Those things are interesting, important. So at UTEP, I was there for 3 years, okay? And I wanted to teach working class students. I was working class, so, you know, the Bryn Mawr experience was good, but I thought, oh, okay. Once at UTEP for 3 years, I trained the different students who took my courses. I taught Ansaldúa. I brought Ansaldua's work and Rosaldo's work to Bryn Mawr. Nobody had read them at the time. This is early 90s, 91, 92. And then at UTEP, 92 to 95, I was there again for 3 years, still writing my dissertation, teaching 5 to 6 courses a year. And then a dean did not believe that I was actually done with my dissertation, so he said, I want to see your dissertation. I said, no. I mean, I have a committee at Stanford, and they are the ones. But, so I had problems with that, right? With the dean not understanding that when you bring somebody of color, that there's so much work that we are doing, that, so that was a challenge. But then when I finished, and then, you know, at UTEP, like in Mexico State, there's no PhD programs. And I wanted to train my own PhD students, doctoral students. So that's why I went on the market, right? And I ended up at the University of Illinois, at Urbana-Champaign, and I was there for 20 years, from 1995 to 2015. And I was hired at Urbana, in large part, I did not know this, because the students, Latino students, had taken over the building, administration building, demanding faculty of color for better education. So the students did it, And then they began to knock on my doors, right, when I was there. As a visiting faculty, I was there as visiting faculty, junior assistant professor, and then I was on the market, so then I actually got some offers. Stanford degree helped, right? I know. That's the hierarchy, it does help, right? And then, okay. So, but at Urbana, you know, there was no Latino Studies program, so I was hired to help establish the Latino Studies program. Not just me, but there were like 3 other people in different departments. So interdisciplinarity matters. That's another issue of transborder studies. You have to be interdisciplinary, okay? So to make a long story short, you know, the 20 years I spent at Illinois, when I got there was only African-American studies. Okay, I began to recruit along with other faculty, scholars, to help establish Asian American studies. There was no Asian American studies at that time. Now there is. Jewish studies. Women's studies became women and gender studies because men matter, right? Men as gender subjects through a feminist perspective, and that is something that I know gender is, you know, means a lot in terms of analytically. And so, because I remember walking into the reception of the Women's Studies program at Illinois, and I was the only guy walking into that room. So just imagine, right? That's in '95. Anyway, very friendly colleagues, so that was changed later. But in anthropology, but it was fine, it was good. In anthropology, it had been all white and international. And they were happy with international students. That's diverse, Alejandro. You know, they told. I said, but no, but domestic. What about domestic, you know, diversity? So I began to help recruit the faculty. Right, the faculty that we recruited to the ethnic studies programs, many of them were in anthropology, and then that led for graduate students to apply to our program, students of color, who then wanted to go to Illinois because they were, diverse faculty. So, so after 20 years, I was promoted from assistant to associate to full professor. I became associate dean. I helped to then recruit and nurture and retain faculty of color and women. So then Illinois became one of the best places to do ethnic studies and border studies. My students who went to work with me from around the world went to Illinois to do border research. And they have published their books and everything, right? So when I was invited to apply to ASU to be the director of the School of Transborder Studies, I thought, oh, great. That's, my mother has been asking me, "Mijo, ¿cuándo te vienes?" Right? Because she's from El Paso. When are you going to return? So, so then here we are. And I thought, Arizona State, with thinking about transborder studies as a school. And then I realized that at ASU, which is actually, the innovation part is really real. I want to tell you, I'm very pleased with that innovation part, number one in innovation. And I see the School of Transborder Studies as one of those examples. But I also learned that there were very few people who understood what that was within ASU, Transborder Studies. So I keep myself educating whoever I meet with, and again, friendly people and all of that. But so that's where we are, okay? And I just want to tell you then that, at ASU, they wanted to establish a PhD degree. After training 70, at least I was in 70 doctoral committees at Illinois. More than half women. Interesting. And then I said, okay, if you're serious at ASU, right? If you're serious, I talked to the deans about establishing a transborder studies department and a PhD degree, then this is what you need, right? I told them, and very, very, again, supportive. But there had been, there's no PhD degree program through a unit nationally, only at ASU, in border studies, okay? There's UTEP, which has a borderland studies program within history, but you have to be, in history. So now, all of that, you'll see that the visual part then is gonna show you what I've done visually through photography. And I'm just going to walk you through it because, oh. 1598 Oñate crosses the river, right? El Camino Real. A crossing in 1598, so historically you get the border crossing, right? Oñate crossing. El Paso, the crossing, El Paso, Texas, El Paso del Norte. The name crossing is already embedded there, okay? And I had to go away to realize that was a border crossing issue. Las Cruces also is a right cruces. And La Entrada, the entry of Oñate is a crossing, of empire into the region. Las Cruces. Cruces in the masculine plural, Los Cruces means crossings. In the feminine plural, Las Cruces, it means crosses. So the crosses of the missions, but also of the violence and the killings of women, and you'll see on the streets of Juarez bring together both the crossings and the crosses, okay? Linguistically, that's different missions in the El Paso region. Las Cruces, and I grew up in Las Cruces, but who would have thought that Las Cruces, for me, was going to become an analytical project? Because cruces, right, Las Cruces, that crosses. There's a history to the name. I deal with the history of names in my work. My favorite restaurant in Las Cruces, right? Nelly's, the crosses, you see the crosses, right? Las Cruces. The second entry of the American Empire into the region, the Mexican War, after the Mexican War, this is in El Paso. The resistance of all kinds, all right? The Juarez El Paso border where I'm from originally. And this is before the wall, how it looked before the wall there. The different crossings there, right? Cruces de todo tipo, railroad, highway, the river. Then there's the fence, okay? Crossing into Mexico. The crossings go from north to south and from south to north. What goes south, of course, are dollars and weapons, right? In the cartel wars. And we don't talk about that as much. The paleteros y todo, waiting to be inspected, okay? Crossing. I have to write about border inspections, that people don't just cross, they need to be inspected. They get inspected, not everybody crosses, some people die, some people get returned. This is like waiting in line, you know, and I have a series of photos of, called the espaldas, seen from the back. And it's a whole project that I actually been working on for years. This is El Paso, again, El Puente, right, the Paso del Norte Bridge. Okay, so before the wall, with the fence. This is a product of 2006 fence. Watching today. Pilgrimage, the cross, and the Cristo Rey, at the border of New Mexico and Texas, the Border Patrol checking on the pilgrims, the cross, mass, border mass, cemetery in Juarez, the oldest cemetery in Juarez. There's many cemeteries now, thanks to the violence in the industry behind the funeral rights industry. The streets of Juarez, 2002, the killings of women and young girls. And to do a study of the violence against women in Juarez, I had to have the feminist training. Remember that, right? It cannot just happen. That's in 2002. Went there to join the group. This is the cross that has become iconic. So as you can see, El Puente, the crossing, and the cross, right? The men, the fathers and brothers, relatives of the young women and girls. Very interesting, very powerful, I believe, as well. And the women who are the ones, the most public, of course, the moms. That's this year. The crossing, the crosses that many of you are familiar with. Today, the bridge, the cross, reminding people that the problem against women has not been solved in spite of the cartels, bright wars. Very, very global, the burritos, Juan Gabriel, Juarez, right? If you want to understand Juarez, you need to know who Juan Gabriel is, right? Obviously, he passed away, you know that, right? Day of the Dead, on the U.S. side. This is the bridge that takes you to Juarez, actually. It's just very fascinating, symbolically. So this is at a very small elementary school. Are you Mexican? Mexican? That they had, I thought it was a very, very powerful image. La frontera linguistically, border finance, a little typo there, nostros, right? Transgressions, border therapy, border highway, fronterizaciones, transnationals. The border is closer than you think. I drove for 20 years from Illinois to El Paso, right? And that's in Missouri. It was. And that's me in Chimayo many years ago. Dead end. Nogales, the border fence, Mexican side. This is in San Luis, where I went to school. And this fence is actually between Sonora and Baja California. Most people think only of Sonora and Arizona as bordering. You have a border with Baja California as well, right? You have this image here, the missions, again, the crosses. The back, I have this is the Espaldas project. The Statue of Liberty giving its back to immigrants. Okay? Mexican dancers, this is called the Pilgrims of the 21st Century. This is in Chandler. And I want you to look at the gender aspect of it. And, okay, that we're here to stay, okay? We're here, we're part of society. The back of Cesar Chavez in Yuma, San Luis. The back of Jat Sotomayor, era YSU, and her guard. Transborder, they have actually a bus in El Paso that is called Transborder. You transborder from Juarez to El Paso and Juarez to El Paso to Juarez, okay? So Transborder is not just an academic thing. Hitchcock at the crossing. You can be creative, right? If you've seen the birds, or you love the birds, or you're afraid of the birds. the back of Snoopy. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Wasn't that fascinating? I could go on hearing more from Dr. Lugo. Thank you so much. Okay, so now we're ready for our first panel of speakers. And the panel is called Promoting Excellence in Social Justice Education. So if the first panelists could please come up to the stage and take your seat, and I'll announce your names. So we have Dr. Christine M. Ami, Faculty, Navajo Cultural Arts Program, Diné College. We also have Dr. Kevin Henry, Jr., Assistant Professor, Educational Policy Studies and Practice from the College of Education and Faculty Affiliate, Africana Studies, and the LGBTQ Institute from the University of Arizona. And we also have Dr. Peter Likens, independent author and President Emeritus from the University of Arizona. So if you would like to commence, I think Dr. Christine Ami, I think you're first.
See how technology works with me today. But yet, don't initially get touching initially, but gonna bashchin. Although it's a great pleasure to be here with you guys. I'm not gonna lie. When they first asked me to come and speak at this summit, my initial thinking was, oh goodness. I teach over at Diné College, and do we do this? Like, is this what do we do? And I come from a Native American Studies PhD background over at the University of California. And so I was thinking, well, I know I did it in my academic work, but talking about an actual institution that thrives and lives in the heart of the Navajo Nation, I was thinking to myself, well, we're very specialized and localized in the teachings that we are hoping to promote and inspire within our youth and our elders that attend the college. So it gave me a moment to sit down and kind of reflect upon what is our institution working with. What is the purpose of our institution? And how does our mission statement align to dialoguing with ethnic, gender, and transborder studies? And so that's kind of what I set up today, and I'm excited to get any feedback as we ourselves are trying to figure that out. So the first thing I did was take a look at our course catalog. Because like I said, I wasn't sure exactly what we were doing was either of any of these disciplines. And what I found out is that we do have what we call ERG, and they're aligned with, ATF and HLC regulations, that only 34 out of our classes are actually classified as ethnic, gender, and race classes. And what most struck me out of this was the fact that out of all of we have a actual Center for Diné Studies. Only 4 out of our 16 Navajo language classes receive this certification, and it's a state certification. And only 1 of our Navajo and Indian Studies class received that. And so that kind of took me by surprise, and I was thinking, well, goodness, then maybe our institution doesn't find that important. Or maybe we're trying to promote something different. As part of our core curriculum and our general education requirements, all students who graduate from Diné College must have at least 2 language classes, and those language classes do classify as ethnic, race, and gender study classes. But it's still, I was thinking to myself, we have so many requirements that demand that they take these Navajo cultural studies classes. What's the purpose, right? Where are we doing something different? Are we doing something that's maybe the same? And so I started thinking about that, and I went back to our mission statement. And our mission statement is a work in progress. It's always a work in progress. But as of right now, it stands, it's rooted in the Diné language and culture, and our mission is to advance quality post-secondary student learning and development to ensure the well-being of Diné people. So we're thinking about identity. At the core of our institution is identity. And then I started thinking about the question of identity. Well, are we dealing with only questions of Navajo centrism, right? well, that's not, I mean, plurality, diversity, that's the complete opposite of what ethnic, gender, and transborder studies is trying to truly promote. So then I started thinking about, well, maybe it's something different that we're working with. Maybe we're working with a different type of reality. And for us, when I start taking a look at the classes that I develop, I work with various different decolonization and colonialization classes, research methods classes, indigenous studies classes. I'm thinking, well, are we trying to just create one Dene identity? And that's not something that we do in our classes. What we take a look at it is that we look at multiple Dene identities. We have such a variation of student population. We have traditional students, non-traditional students. We have high school students that attend our college, and we have elders, especially in the program that I work with, which is the Navajo Cultural Arts Program, and we'll get there in just one second. But we have urban, what we classify as our urban Navajos that come back. We have non-natives that come. We have students that come into our college from as far away as Japan. And then we have students who have different identities in terms of, well, what are their religious bases? What are their worldviews? We have traditionalists. We have people who practice Native American church. We have Christians. We have atheists, right? People who just, there's just such a variety of identities that's who our population addresses. We have multiple gender roles. I remember the first time I took an ethnic gender studies class, they gave me an article and telling us how feminist Navajos were, and I'm thinking to myself, are we feminists? Like, I thought that's just what we had to do. And so instead of promoting gender roles, right, we look at it as responsibilities. When you're born with responsibilities that you have to take care of. And regardless of any way that you may identify, you still are responsible for those responsibilities, their privileges that you are born into. And so we take a look at all these different types of gender identities that people can self-identify as, but you still have roles and responsibilities. There's do's and there don'ts, and there's reasons and rationale for each one of them. And so we talk about the plurality of that. Even now, as many of you guys can see, I'm very pregnant. There's many things that I can't do. I'm a butcher, and I'm a weaver, and I can't do any of those things right now. And it's a responsibility. We look to teach greater than just the individual, right? We're no longer working for just ourselves. It's not an egotistical position and responsibility I have now. It's something bigger. And so that's what we take a look at when we look at gender roles. And then we look at all different types of border transitions. Talking about different crossings. I mean, if we look at where I live at and where I'm from and how my grandparents don't have running water. And then I go into the institution where we do have those. We have electricity, we have running water, we have plumbing, we have sheep. So at the end of the day, I have to run home before my office hours, make sure my sheep are out of the field and back into the corral, make it back to my office hours before students get there. So there's different types of, those type of crossings. We also have to deal with the actual day-to-day basis of going to border towns. What is that? What are the realities of that? So we take a look at those areas as well when we're working through those different types of crossings. So where my programs lie, I am the Cultural Arts Program Grant Manager, and I am also part of the Navajo Psychology BA program. These two programs are really taking a look at dialogues with ethnic gender studies. And I talk about dialoguing, like I said, because we're dealing with an isolation. We are dealing with a specific population who's going to be going into diverse areas. The difference between how these programs started is that the Navajo Cultural Arts Program, before I started on, was really a top-down push, right? Administration said, this is what we want, we have funding for it, who's gonna run it? Whereas the Navajo Psychology Program came out of the community. And this affected the development of the program, because when I stepped on as grant manager for the Navajo Cultural Arts Program, I found that there was a lack of buy-in, right? It was coming from top down. And that lack of buy-in made it difficult to get faculty to jump on board. It made it difficult for financial aid to want to fund the program. It made it difficult for students to be like, well, is this going to happen or is it not going to happen? It's on the course catalog, but it's not being offered. So we went back to the drawing board with that one. And we started, well, let's find out a mission statement. Let's find out what our purpose is. What are we supposed to be doing? What does the community want? And that became the key stakeholder. So we started off taking a look at even something as simple as our logo, right? What does that signify? How does that create animosity, right? How does that create a wholeness at the same time? And we went from there and said, well, what does the community want to learn? And the community wanted to learn not just skills. At our college previously, you could learn how to weave, you could learn how to do baskets, you could learn how to do all these cultural arts, but you were just learning the skills. So where was the non-material value in that? And that's when we started backing up. And that's when we started seeing when community bought in. They said, yeah, we want that. We want that. And I had a group of 4 students who came to me and they said, Christine, can you run this program? And I said, what do you mean run this program? They said, well, your husband's a silversmith and you're a weaver. You know how to sell. We want to know how to become self-sufficient. We want to know how to cross, Western markets, but at the same time, still be able to participate in ceremonial trade systems. How can we do that? Because we see that you do that. And once I had that community buy-in, that's when our program hit, right? Hit a level of success that we didn't necessarily think that we were going to be able to find. The Navajo psychology program, it started because we had advisory circles. We went back to traditional concepts of how war and peacemaking it was developed and decided upon, and that's how we developed our advisory circles. We got community input, which is awesome. It's also kind of complicated. Because everybody wants everything all at the same time. So you have to learn how to find out, well, we have to hierarchy things, right? Strategize, figure out how things are going to function when we start putting them in. It's different to plan than it is to put into reality. And so those are the kind of things that we worked with these 2 programs. But once again, the key for these 2 programs that I'm involved with over at the college is going back to what does the community want. And not just what does the community want, but what is the community going to do? There's a big difference between talking and doing. And so that's one of the things that we really strive to hit, is that this is things that they're going to follow through on. So with that community, right, push, this is some of the successes that we have been able to see. I've already talked about the community involvement. We have community-driven curriculum and events. The students want to know how to go to graduate school. We're no longer a community college. We offer BA programs. What do you do now, right? What can you do with that afterwards? And so that's the kind of programming that we're working with. With the cultural arts program, students want to learn basket making. Man, there's a real big push right now for basket making and horsehair braiding teachings. And so that's what we provide. So it's tons of surveying, tons of assessment that goes into it, and taking that assessment and doing research to figure out how can we make this happen. There's an intergenerational transfer of skill and knowledge. And this is so important because we always take a look at our elders, and I'm not saying that we don't respect our elders. I love our elders. But they're not the only knowledge holders. And so we have so many youth that are thriving in the community, and they have so much to offer, and we offer them the platform to do so, okay? And so that's one of the things that we really push, is that it's not just elders. We have a lot of this knowledge and skill that's in our youth, and so we see intergenerational transfer of knowledge happening the opposite way. So that's been amazing, an amazing result that we weren't necessarily intending. We have tribal specificity does not signify lack of plurality. We have all different types of identities within just one small tribal group. And then we can dialogue that with intertribal and global perspectives, and not just indigenous global perspectives, in all areas. And so we see that's currently taking place right now. And for me, the most important thing is individual accountability. It has been a huge success. We put the programming out there for them, right? It's up to the individual to step up and to follow through and to make it a reality for themselves. And that really goes back to a lot of the Navajo teachings that our programs push, especially to Ahojit Ewo, which is like a Navajo self-sufficiency, right? That you have to step up and do it. It's meeting halfway. It's not that, oh, something's given to you and you take it for granted. It's a two-way street that goes on. And if you don't reach out, then nobody's going to help you. So we see that happening right now. And self-sufficiency. We're seeing students want to go to grad school. We're seeing students want to do the BA program. I'm seeing students starting to sell, and they're starting to focus on good things in their lives. And taking, when we look at the cultural arts, it's about breaking and destruction of natural resources and creating something beautiful out of it. And it's helping them with their self-esteem and their identity building as who they are as a Navajo artisan. So we see that taking place. We do have some program challenges, right? And more than, we need more people to come help us with these challenges. But we're taking them on one by one. And the first thing is, how do we institutionalize cultural teachings? When you take these cultural teachings that have normally been taught just on a sensory basis, you learn them day by day, it's not something that's structured, and you put it into a Western institutional structure, which the college represents. It still represents. How do you do that, and how do you do that successfully? That's one of the things that we've been really working with. When can you go to gather key, sumac for baskets? There's only certain times that you can go hunt for that. How do we teach people how to butcher when they're working with moccasins so they can start to, then we had to backtrack, how do we hunt? And you can only hunt during certain time periods, and women, although women can hunt, you have to give up things. It's part of those responsibilities once again. So those are the kinds of things that are realities for us. Credentialing, or well, assessment, we'll get back to that. Assessment, credentialing, all of these knowledge holders, right? How do we bring them into the community, into a Western institution that demands that we have meet HLC requirements, that we meet ATF requirements? How do we do that? And so that's been one of the challenges that we've faced. Community demands. Man, the community wants a lot. That's what I've realized. And it's a good thing. But the good thing is that they're showing up. So it's not that we're putting on programming and nobody's showing up. In our BA program that just launched this year, we have the largest incoming cohort out of the entire institution, and it's all community driven. Same thing with our cultural arts program. We've doubled from the first cohort into the second cohort. And while that may be that we only have 8 people now, that's 8 more people that we didn't have last year. And then funding, making sure that our students are funded. If they don't meet certain HL requirements or under degree checklists, how do they get funding for it? Because Pell Grants won't pay for that. And so those are the kinds of issues that we've been taking a look at in those areas. And then assessment. How do I assess these things? Not everybody who picks up a torch is an amazing silversmith. Not everybody who tries basket making can get the reeds to work for them. Not everybody who sets up a loom can finish the rug. Does that mean that they fail? No, right? Those are the kinds of teachings that we're trying to push. It also means that, well, how do I start taking a look at the larger, when our institution is based off of this philosophy, and how do we take that very sacred, those sacred songs and teachings and assess that in a Western mechanism? It's a conversation that happens at every division meeting and every intercampus meeting that I'm missing today. But those are some of the program challenges that we've been facing. But in the face of that, I look at every individual, every community member that we've been able to touch through these 2 programs. And that's what I think I'm here as an educator for, and I think that's what our division chair who started the psychology BA program is here for, because one person is changing just a little bit at a time. And I tell my students, I don't care if you don't like this class, that's fine. Or I don't care if you like it, I just care that you have a feeling on it, right? That you make a choice. You don't sit in mediocrity, you don't sit in an area where you don't care anymore. You figure out where your position's at and why. And so that's what these programs are really trying to promote, that type of self-sufficiency. So yeah, we do ethnic, gender, and transborder studies. That's what I found out. And I love opening up the students' eyes with that, the fact that there are multiple denied identities and there are multiple ways that they can gain self-sufficiency. So, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ami. Next, we have Dr. Kevin Henry, Jr. for your comments.
Good morning. So I will admit this was, I'm a late riser. So I may not be on my best behavior this morning, so I'll try as best as possible. I want to obviously thank the organizers for putting together this extraordinary event. If anyone has ever organized a conference, you know how difficult it can be. So I definitely want to thank them. I also want to give special shout outs to Francesca James Hernandez, as well as Dr. Suzanne Desjardins, who is a former student of the U of A and graduate of our program. So I thank you all for this opportunity to be here this morning. And I also have to thank Dr. Lugo for his words earlier this morning. And it was so nice to see that there is another Badger in the house. So there are more than, okay, look at us, Badgers in Arizona, right? And so I would say in addition to, the Marxism and the feminism and the bagels that you had in Arizona, the one thing that, the dairy, right? The one thing that I had as well that I learned of in a very terrible way is how deeply and terribly cold it is there. I am from New Orleans, and so I am used to humidity and warmth, and I'm also a black person, which means we don't do that. We can survive in any place, but it's just not the norm for us. I remember when I got to Wisconsin, I told them that I went to one of the stores and I said I needed to find a jacket that if I were just to fall down in the street, I could just bundle up for the rest of the winter and not have to move. So I spent my first year walking around looking like the black Michelin man in in Madison. So with that, I just want to say it's nice to be in a place where February and March are warm and you don't have to worry about your car. Well, you do have to worry about your car stopping and things of that sort, but not because of the coldness. So I also should add, I don't have a PowerPoint, so I am a low-tech millennial. So hopefully the sound of my voice may be entertaining enough for you this morning. What I've tried to do is sketch out a little bit of my thoughts on ethnic, gender, and transborder studies, and it's really coming from this personal space, but you'll see where I try to interweave the personal as well as a larger analysis of power. And so essentially what I'm talking about today is heretical discourses, and I'll tell you more about that later on in the talk. So, she does not know her beauty. She thinks her brown body has no glory. If she could dance naked under palm trees and see her image in the river, she would know. Yes, she would know. But there are no palm trees in the street, no palm trees in the street, and dishwater gives back no images. So this poem is Images by Harlem Renaissance writer William Warren Cuny, and it was popularized by legendary singer, songwriter, and composer, and one of my favorite artists, Nina Simone. So I say this to start off because part of this is about images, and the images that we allow to come into our lives. And so my name is Kevin Lawrence Henry Jr. As has been said, I'm an assistant professor of educational policy studies and practice at the University of Arizona in the College of Education. And I'm also affiliated with Institute for Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, and Transgender Studies, as well as Africana Studies. I'm a native of New Orleans and Hurricane Katrina survivor, the child of Raquel and Kevin Henry, and grandchild of Gertrude and Horace Edwards, and Geraldine and Elmer Henry. I am the constellation of all those who have come before, and a remnant for those who will come after, and a partner for those who are here now with me. And so indeed, I am learning to see my image in the river. Now, My research and teaching are ultimately concerned with power. What are its contours? How does it move? What is its shape? Who has it? Who doesn't? And under what circumstances does it operate? These questions have been animated and buttressed by my interest in what can be classified as philosopher Anthony Bogus terms heretical studies. Now, in the case of today, heretical studies could be considered ethnic, gender, and transborder studies. And so before I move forward, it may be useful to explain what I mean by heretical and what heresy more precisely opens up for us. So in the traditional sense, heresy is often used to describe a belief or opinion contrary to religious, often Christian doctrine. So extending its use, we can think of ethnic, gender, and transborder studies as heretical studies that challenge the orthodoxy of the day, studies and practices that aim to dismantle, dethrone, and destabilize Western rituals of dehumanization, oppression, exclusion, violence, and movements towards practices of freedom, toward what this year's conference theme is essentially all about, social justice. So ultimately, as Anthony Bogus reminds us, the project of heresy that our Black, Chicano, feminist, indigenous, queer, and Asian American foremothers and forefathers engaged in were larger projects of, and I quote, becoming human, not white, nor imitative of the colonial, but overturning white European normativity, refusing, end quote. So in this refusal, we see what is at stake, and centrally that is an issue of power as manifested in politics, which takes various forms. And in our case this morning, one form is via schooling and education. So if, as the saying goes, knowledge is power, the question is whose knowledge empowers what? So in recent times, we have seen to have a collective desire to depoliticize education. That is to say, to ignore the traces of negative, violent power that operate in our school's curriculum, which rearrange the mantra that a mind is a terrible thing to waste, into creating waste of minds. So these are forms of what African-American historian Carter G. Woodson in 1933, almost 80 years, over 80 years ago, terms miseducation. And this has been seen in attempts to, in various ways and forms, and various religious groups, various ethnic groups, as they say, to kill the Indian and save the man. This is the miseducation that we're talking about. To offer education that is culturally irrelevant and deeply colonial, education that offers the hidden curriculum of heteropatriarchy and racism in the drag of, in our current day, standardized testing for K-12 schools. These orthodoxies of oppression, of oppressive education, are what give rise to demands, most specifically in the late 60s and 1970s, for education that was justice-centered. So for instance, in 1968, a coalitional effort that was led by the Third World Liberation Front, which included the Latin American Student Organization, Black Student Union, Asian American Political Alliance, Filipino American Collegiate Endeavor, and Native American Student Union at San Francisco State, demanded the establishment of an ethics studies department. So this inaugurated demands and efforts across the United States to do the same. So does she know her beauty? So I came to these heretical discourses in high school. I had the opportunity to participate in a summer transitional program at Tulane University that was offered to local public school students in New Orleans. So this was an effort by Tulane to recruit local African-American students to the university, given the university's abysmal record of diversity and even worse relationship with the city of New Orleans. And I, with two other students from my high school, were selected to participate in this summer program. We were tasked to take a freshman level writing course. I enjoyed English, so I imagined I would enjoy this course, and it would be like any other English course that I had taken, right? And mostly reading the traditional canon, Poe, Hawthorne, Frost, Fitzgerald, Steinbeck, and maybe a person of color, Langston Hughes if we were lucky. But never what I have imagined however, that this course would open me up to a world of possibilities that I had yet imagined, a world that helped me to see me in and beyond the text, a world that was not satisfied with the world as it is, but was, however, invested in who I was, am, and could be. So the course wasn't your regular English course at all. It was taught by a professor and a graduate student in the Africana Studies, what they call African and African Diaspora Studies at Tulane. And it focused on literature across the diaspora. And I recall that summer being introduced to Frantz Fanon and his text, Black Skin, White Masks. And while I wrestled with the sections that I read, I mean, I thought, like, what the hell do they have me reading this text? I'm like in 11th grade, what's going on? But I wrestled with the text. I was simultaneously awakened and forced to consider and reckon with the sections that we did read, and had to reckon with the legacies of colonialism that were impacting our world today as I understood it. And to be a critical thinker and active community member is what the course was really about at its heart. So this course came at a time, at a critical time for me, as months later, Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, decimating the city, and I had to evacuate to Houston with my family. The course was the first that helped me to give and gave me a vocabulary and lens for understanding and moving through the world. But ultimately, it helped me to think about the type of world I want for myself, my community, and those that I care deeply for, even if my affections have not been concretized by a personal relationship. Years later, I am now a university professor, and these heretical discourses carry me into the work I currently do on education, privatization, and social stratification. I conduct research and teach courses informed by these theories: critical race theory, feminist theories, queer theories, which have cocooned and comforted me, as well as charged and challenged me. So these theories have helped me to see my beauty in a world made ugly by oppression. And so I was in Madison for 4 years, and I had the opportunity to move back to New Orleans to do my research on charter schools and precisely how charter schools work as conduits for the reproduction of white supremacy in post-Katrina New Orleans. And we're in an actually really interesting moment now, as we know, because we have an education secretary who is very intent on bringing charter schools and voucher programs to students and communities across the United States. Despite the fact that there's actually no empirical evidence whatsoever to suggest that these programs help students or actually ameliorate any of the institutional problems that we know exist. And so I was able to return to do that work because I thought that was an important project. And what my training was able to do in ethnic studies and critical race theory and feminist theory was able to give me a lens to see the world and to be able to interpret what the world was offering us and to essentially refuse some of those things that the world was offering us as well. So what do these heretical discourses, ethnic, gender, and transborder studies mean for students' education and community well-being? That was one of the questions we were tasked with answering. And so there are a few things that I'd like to sketch out with respect to that. The first would be personal empowerment. Right? When we think about these courses, what it did for me and what it has done for so many other students who have been engaged in these types of classes is that it helps us to see ourselves in a new light. Often we are socialized in the United States and elsewhere to see ourselves as, to either consider ourselves as mute, to erase who we are, or to not see our power, to realize that we actually have power. And so what these programs do is to actually empower students, right? And then it also does something in creating safe spaces. And while I am not opposed to this notion of safe space, but what it does do is open up spaces for students on campuses which may be hostile to their very existence. And most importantly, or just importantly, it provides critical consciousness, right? We have, as I mentioned before, depoliticized the work of these heretical programs. But at its core, these programs came about to offer ways of being that existed beyond the realms of Western notions of the human, beyond the realms of what we constitute as the normal person, someone who operates to reproduce inequality. And so in developing these critical consciousness, I'm thinking of Paulo Freire's work and his notion of reading and writing the world. And he talks about how these programs, essentially a program that's about conscientious teaching, helps students to do things. And he says there's a definition of the word, and it says the word is composed of two parts, and that's reflection and action. And if one part is sacrificed, the other suffers as well. So what these programs do is give students and faculty members and community members an ability to understand and reflect upon the world, but also to change the world. And this is a very important task. And what it does is reorient. This is another aspect of what the positives are. It reorients students to be connected to the community, not removed, detached individuals, but part of a whole. This moves away from these kind of Western egotistical understandings of the self, right? We know that often it's I think, therefore I am, right? Who was that, Descartes or somebody like that, right? And I think, therefore I am, which is different from a West African way of thinking of ourselves, which is I am because we are, right? So you can see literally in this West, and Descartes is talking about, it's about me, I'm thinking, therefore I'm a robot, right? Versus I exist in community in conjunction with other people. My existence is predicated on that relationship with other people. And so what these programs do is to help reorient and to destabilize Western arrangements that are not concerned with many of us in this audience here today. And then on the very technical sense, we know that these programs increase the academic achievement of students, right? TUSD's Mexican American Studies is a perfect example. We can think, for instance, my colleague Nolan Cabrera, as well as our Dean Ronald Marks and our former colleague Ozan Jacquet wrote a piece that discussed in many ways how the program that was here in Tucson improved students in both traditional sense but also a non-traditional sense, right? There was also a recent Stanford study on culturally relevant curriculum and teaching that illustrates the success of these programs. And ultimately what these programs do is dethrone ways of being that allow for the continued oppression to flourish. So this is what it offers us. Of course, there are challenges that exist as well, both external and internal. Those external challenges are those most precisely, and I think the largest one, yes, funding issues, yes, not necessarily being able to link the curriculum to the standards and measures of Western society, Western education, but the true external issue is those that are interested in maintaining inequality, and they know why these programs must be created, and they know why these programs must be challenged, and so they attack them because they know what is at stake, and essentially what is at stake is issues of power. This is why the recent Arizona Bill 2120 was introduced and subsequently defeated, but nevertheless, we know that these bills come about to eradicate ways of being that are counter-hegemonic, that challenge the systems. And then, of course, there are the internal issues that our inability to work and struggle with communities. So one of the questions was, how do we make sure that ethnic studies, gender studies, transborder studies are relevant, right? What does this mean? That we actually have to be in community with other people. It can't just be located at the site of the university, because we miss so much when we do that, and it essentially betrays the legacy upon which it is built. Also, we have to be very cognizant of how we may reproduce the violences that we seek to fight in these programs. But ultimately, what I want to leave us with is that these programs offer us a sign of hope and signs of possibility, and energize students and community members to move and act in the world, to be agents of their own lives in conjunction with the communities in which they so deeply care about. So thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to the questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Henry. Wow, I'd love to be a student in your classes. This is wonderful. Okay, yes. And so now we have our third panelist, Dr. Peter Likens, Professor and President Emeritus at the University of Arizona. Thank you.
Let me begin by expressing my admiration and appreciation for the speakers who preceded me. Really good work, and I enjoyed it sufficiently to make the conference a success for me already. But I do confess to a bit of uncertainty as to my proper role here. These people are experts in these disciplines, people who do research and write papers and teach courses. I've never even taken a course in any of the 6 or 7 disciplines that are represented here today. Those courses didn't exist when I was a student. So, what am I doing here? Well, I have to talk from my personal experience as a father and as a lifelong academic. But even there, I'm limited. Like Mark Hanna, I'm an old white guy. I'm an 80-year-old, straight, white, Christian male, working class, small town, 3 degrees in engineering, 30 years as an administrator, dean, provost, and twice president. That profile does not offer much promise of anything I might say here today. I know why I'm here. I'm here because after I retired, I wrote a memoir about my family. And you can't see this picture, but half a dozen kids adopted, California, born in the 1960s, black, white, and brown, plumbing into a family that was breaking a lot of rules at that time. It's not uncommon today to see a family of mixed race, of racial diversity, but believe me, we were most extraordinary and quite controversial when we bring in 2 black kids, for example, Obama black, that is to say, white birth mothers, black birth fathers, black in the American culture, and the National Association of Black Social Workers said, no, 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 no. Only black families should adopt black children to preserve the cultural identity. Even more controversial, 2 Native American children of the Morongo tribe in Southern California. Now, they were 7 and 10 years old when they came to us, and they'd been living in foster care. And although we tried to go back to the grandmother, who was the survivor, their parents were both dead, our kids didn't even recognize grandmother, and they weren't much interested in preserving the culture that we were anxious to foster. And a Mexican-American birth mother for another of our children. The only white kid had a medical problem at birth. It was a very complex mix that we engaged. But I am not going to talk today about that family. You got to read the book. Go to the Tucson Festival of Books tomorrow and find me there. I would rather try to respond to the challenge that was given to all of us as panelists, to try to adapt our experience to the challenge you face in creating this center of excellence that encompasses all these half a dozen quite different disciplines and find something to bring together into a cohesive whole. And rather than talk like an old administrator from experience in trying to create management structures, I'm going to tell a couple of stories. Professors learn, presidents learn from their students. Believe me, students, you are teachers, especially of the old white folks. Yeah, right. I'll talk about a lesson learned from Leon Caldwell and a lesson learned from Taino Lopez, both students at Lehigh University when I was a very young president in the 80s. Leon and I met, young man sitting next to me at a gathering of a commission on the status of women, but he was a young black man. And when our meeting ended, our little session ended, he said, I understand you have some concerns about our plans to create an Umoja house. And I said, well, yeah, Leon, I am concerned about that. He said, may I come to your office and talk to you about it? I made an appointment, and in less than an hour, I got a real education. Umoja is the Swahili word for freedom, as some of you probably know, and the Umoja houses This one at Lehigh was to be a rental property of what had been a private home on the edge of campus, a place for black students to live. Maybe a half a dozen black students. More importantly, a gathering place for black students all over campus. Now, this is Lehigh University in the 80s, a very, very white school, 2%, 5% black students. And I was so pleased that they were there and anxious that they be integrated into the community, into the student body. And Leon explained to me that they needed a safe place. They needed a place where their culture was something they could comfortably engage. They believed in integration, but not assimilation. They wanted to maintain their identity and have a place where they didn't have to worry about being judged about somebody in the room who thought perhaps they didn't belong at Lehigh University. Leon was so persuasive. And he made me realize that as we brought together our family in the 60s, you got to remember, no, that's not the right word. You need to read about the 60s. You're too young to remember. But it was a time when the civil rights movement was all about integration. We pulled together this family, this very diverse family. And in fact, what we did, not deliberately, but inevitably, is assimilate that family into our culture. Even though most of the people in this picture are black, white, black and brown, still it's the parents' culture that ultimately penetrated them all. The parents' patterns of speech, the parents' culture. That's assimilation. And that's not our objective as an American society. It's celebrating diversity, embracing diversity, integrating, maybe you can use that word, but carefully, carefully. So Leon made me understand I got to push the Umoja House, I got to push the BSU, Black Students Union, I got to put some presidential muscle behind all these efforts to create separate identities, including gays and lesbians and women and all the separate populations. And that became a driving motivation for me. Okay, 1 year later, I'm teaching a course, co-teaching a course for freshmen, for first semester freshmen. And it's really a seminar on multiculturalism, I guess. It was all about bringing together 12 or 15 students and do a little seminar format, first semester freshmen, introducing them to the complexities of cultures that they should expect to find on the Lehigh University campus and in the America and in the world that they were entering into. And it's not a very diverse place, but we assembled some international students, a couple of young men from Korea and a young man from Haiti, and America's diversity, also a Russian immigrant, and then a black student or two, and Puerto Rican students. The Hispanic community there is more Puerto Rican than Mexican. We created as diverse a community as we could, and we began talking about the complexities of their different perspectives that they were bringing together at Lehigh University. That was a very informal setting. We had name tags with first names, including the faculty. We're all supposed to call each other by our first names. We had a very open give and take, but even there, you know, and we know that some things you're just not going to say in that setting. However hard the faculty try to create an open dialogue, it's not entirely open. And so we asked each of the students after each class to write a paragraph in a little personal journal about their impression of that day's work. And then at the end of the week, they'd hand in the journals, still private journals and not for grades, but just so the faculty could get some feedback, to get some sense of how this is working. I got a journal entry from Taina Lopez, a beautiful young Puerto Rican girl, 18 years old. And she said, we spent 6 weeks talking about all the ways we're different. Can we spend a week or so talking about all the ways we are the same? Wow. Wow. Sometimes faculty learn powerful lessons from their students. then you might think there's a contradiction between what Leon Caldwell is saying about maintaining our independent special diversity, our identity, separate from others. And Taina's admonition to celebrate our humanity, to celebrate our common humanity, while acknowledging the diversity. So we tried. We asked her to be open about her concern, and she had a little discussion of our common humanity, and it was just beautiful, just beautiful. So when you put together this center of excellence in all these disciplines, and those three words don't capture it all. We all know that Native American studies and African American studies and Mexican studies, wow, each one of them is so different from the other. Each one of them is complex in itself. Asian American studies, think about that. Korean studies, Filipino studies, these are different worlds. Among Native American studies, the Tohono and the Iroquois have different cultures, different life experience. And try to pull any one of these things together is complicated. And to try to pull them all together in a center is wonderful and dangerous at the same time, because you cannot minimize any of the differences. You can disrespect a component of the entire assembly if you don't celebrate it just as much as every other element of the assembly. But if all you have is a center that is a list of a whole bunch of different things, not just 3, but 6 or 7, which is what you actually have here, if that's all your center is, then it's just a paper structure. And as an outsider looking at it, evaluating a request for funds or some other acknowledgement of your importance, I'm not interested. Just a paper structure. But if you can somehow, maybe with the name of your center, maybe it's a center for the study of American humanity. I mean, whatever you do in creating this entity, you must somehow convey the importance of the common humanity that you're all a part of. And somehow you must respect and celebrate the diversity. I mean, that's an American challenge. But it's also your challenge as you try to put together the center. Now, according to the program, I was done before I started because we're running a little bit late here. But I have to add one more thought. Last November, we suffered through an election in this country that was, for me, profoundly depressing, discouraging. I've spent all my adult life advancing an agenda that tries to change the America I grew up in. I came of age in the 50s. Think about the 50s. It was not a golden age, except for people like me, straight white Christian males. Not a golden age for anybody else. And I've spent my life, and my wife, as much as I've spent our lives trying to move this massive culture into more accepting and embracing and, yeah, but, so I confess I felt personally offended when this thing went wrong. But now it's March, and I'm back where I was before November. I'm a believer that things are going to be all right, and young people especially, you got to believe it. You got to believe it. And it's not just some old guy talking. This is inevitable that America becomes the multicultural, accepting, multiracial, multi-religious organization that it was envisioned in your dreams. Why? 3 factors: demography, mobility, biology. Demographically, you all know this, no matter how big the walls are, no matter what the objects of immigration, we are already, as a society, going to move toward a time when white folks are a minority. That's going to happen. It doesn't matter whether it happens in 15 years or 20 or 25, it's going to happen. Demography. Mobility. We're all over the place, young people especially, all over the country, all over the world. You just have a different mindset than people back in the 50s who kind of stayed within 30 miles of their birthplace as a matter of family expectation. Mobility. And mobility means you're interacting across boundaries, across borders. Maybe in a university, a community college, maybe in the military, maybe just on a job. You're interacting with people different from yourself. Now we come to biology. You fall in love. You fall in love. You make babies. I mean, that's going to happen as surely as anything else you can imagine. Biology trumps politics, trumps ideology, even trumps theology. People come together, young people come together and fall in love and ignore the boundaries that were defined by their parents and their grandparents. And that will make interracial families, intercultural families, increasingly the norm. It's already the case that in the last census, the most rapidly growing category in the census was more than one race. And I tell you, when multiracial people have babies, they're multiracial babies, and boy, that just explodes. So we're going to be a society that respects differences, but doesn't have sharp edges for the boundaries, but has blurry boundaries, defined biologically, culturally, sociologically. And that I may not see, because I'm 80 years old, but you're going to see it, young people. And you're going to work toward it with confidence and with faith that you shall prevail.
Thank you, Dr. Likens, for your inspiring words for all of us of all ages and generations, and we will keep moving forward in a positive way in these troubled times. Thank you all for sharing your insights, your expertise, and obviously your passion. I think we all felt that, didn't we? Yes, definitely. So we've reached the end of the first panel discussion, which was outstanding. And we will open the floor just for a few minutes, because we are running behind, for some questions for the panelists. And we have a microphone here, and I think we're going to move one to the center. If folks would like to step up to the microphone and ask a couple of questions for our panelists. Any questions? I'm sure there's, you have them. No? Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much for what you shared with us. Very interesting. Lots of food for thought. When you were pointing out how we also have to celebrate our things that we have in common, I was thinking maybe we could title such a program the Transborder Humanity Project, something like that, because how are we ever going to come up with a name that encompasses what your 20 minutes was about? Because it is very complex. And I'm very grateful that this institution is striving to be a center for excellence and at the forefront of a badly needed program throughout the U.S. But I am mystified, or I can't see how we're going to, I can't see the light at the end of the tunnel of how to put all of these factors together. And both of the other speakers raised different facets of the same problem about celebrating differences without assimilating. because I am the daughter of an immigrant who very much wanted to assimilate. Some cultures view the U.S. as a place where the streets are paved with gold. And my mother wanted me to be as American as possible, and I think that I lost out greatly on half of my culture. So I don't want to assimilate. I appreciate that point. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on how we can overcome this particular obstacle or create an opportunity.
Well, all of us can respond, but I think you, in these various disciplinary studies, are accustomed to thinking of yourselves as, I hesitate to say peripheral to society, as somehow on the edge. And you need to understand yourselves to be central to society. You are studying American humanity. That's what you need to understand about yourselves. It's the essence of American humanity that is captured in all of these disciplines. I think you need to find, the workshops might help you today, but you need to search for ways to describe yourselves sufficiently simply so outsiders can grasp your intent, but sufficiently compellingly so people understand you're not just talking about a list of peripheral disciplines. You're talking about the essence of the study of American humanity.
So I would, can you hear me? Okay. So I think that's a wonderful question. I think at its heart, all of these disciplines come about because of dehumanization, right? I mean, this is precisely the reason why African American studies comes about, Mexican American studies come about, because of the legacies of settler colonialism and X, Y, and Z. And not to be dismissive of the X, Y, and Z. Not to be dismissive of the X, Y, and Z. Is this one better? I'm not sure. Is this one better? Yes, it is.
Yes.
And so I think there is something actually to hold on to with respect to the kind of peripheral, marginalized identities, because yes, these things are part of American history, but I also think that there is something to be gained and garnered from the margins. When we think about ethnic studies, I think of, for instance, Bell Hooks. She has a book, From Margin to Center, and she talks about the margin as a space that allows people to see things in different ways. It's the same thing that W.B. Du Bois talks about in his Souls of Black Folks when he talks about the two-ness, the double consciousness, right? So I think there's something, the tension that we have is, yes, to recognize that many of these programs come about because of dehumanization, and it's a process of rehumanizing groups that have often and continuously. That's not a historical thing that we're talking about. The fact that November happened is a clear indication that many of the identities that I hold and many of you hold in this room are under assault and seen to be as superfluous to the project of the United States. So I think that we have to hold in tension both the unique histories and struggles from which ancestors have created these institutions in these disciplinary spaces, but also understand that at its heart, the one thing that does connect each of them, whether it's queer studies, whether it's women and gender studies, whether it's Chicano studies, it's about a process of rehumanizing people who have been seen or castigated as the other, right? And that is a political project because we have to, I think, so I do critical race theory, and so I actually do believe that we need to be very real about inequalities that exist today, and not to kind of move past them and think of them as passé or as something that we don't focus on and call what it is. So I think actually the calling of it as ethnic, gender, and transborder studies is, I personally like it because it calls attention to something that is seen as outside of the realm of traditional scholarship or education. So I actually like it.
I think Dr. Lugo has a response.
Is that working? Yes, okay.
Thank you for your question as well. I believe that, you know, the panelists' presentations were examples of what transborder studies is. And I don't see myself at the School of Transborder Studies at Arizona just being about America. You know, remember that, and as you, Provost, used one of my phrases, that society is made out of border zones. So humanity is made out of border zones themselves. So you see, and it is that rich, it's very rich, very complex, so that even within one family, and I'm going to read your book, it's wonderful. Even within one family, you have gender and generational borders, right? Men, women, or if it's same-sex couples, then you have children, and then generational differences. Those are border zones. And you know, in the old days, in the traditional sense, we tend to think you only as a nuclear family, let's say. But so I think transborder humanity, as the colleague mentioned, is something that I believe I see myself doing. Again, as an anthropologist who studies culture and human, practices around the world. I see that whether it's in Papua New Guinea, whether it's in South America, or in our neighborhoods surrounding our cities, there's border zones there. In Africa, in Southeast Asia, in Alaska, you see. So historically, in the academy, we did not think about culture and society in the border sense. We needed to think about culture in terms of patterns of behavior. And I mentioned Renato Rosaldo's work, which influenced me tremendously in the mid-'80s, because he said, as an anthropologist, we need to think not just about cultural patterns. And if you recall, I mentioned cultural patterns of power. We need to understand how power gets reproduced as well, and inequalities. There's patterns, right, of those processes. But how many of those patterns are constituted by border zones of all kinds? Religious, economic, demographic, biological, all of the three categories that Mr. Lincoln mentioned, that the demography, mobility, biology, they in themselves are intertwined. So what I'm saying here is that what is so rich about transborder studies in the academy today, and that only ASU, and I've been to many universities, as you know, and I have many colleagues around the country who teach a lot of things, and what you had to say about the students and what we learn from them is incredible, it's true. But you see, I had to come to ASU because through Illinois, I was doing border work. But it was through anthropology, or through ethnic studies, or through gender and women's studies, or through education. A lot of, I work with many other colleagues across the campus. So I think that what we, in the name itself, just to my own 2 cents on the name, which I wanna, I think it's important to discuss how we name ourselves, right? I talk about naming, that matters, and I value the point. But what I'm doing at ASU regarding transborder studies, I remind the public that my unit used to be Chicano studies in the 90s. And then it became Chicano Latino studies, where we engage with Puerto Rican, Dominican, Central American, and not just Chicano or Mexican, communities, all in the plural, But what I emphasize to the public about the school, and I believe that this is possible at Pima Community College, is that we're using the legacies of ethnic studies and the traditions that in the academy, traditions of resistance, of refusal, against power inequalities of all kinds, as points of reference, so to better educate the public on transborder issues, so that when people rebel in another country, in another continent, and there will be ethnic relations there, always. What is it that we have to, what is it that we can offer to those, let's say in Europe, with a refugee problem, in Syria, with a Syrian refugee problem, right? Or that with the French dealing with their previously colonized peoples now in Paris. Those are border crossings, So what I'm saying here is that, I agree with Mr. Henry, Dr. Henry, that we should, the margin has become the center, let me put it that way. And the center is not what it used to be, right? Privileges occur within
communities and within different spaces. So I am convinced, after having been in 7 universities, that anthropology, as open-minded as it was not enough. Latino studies or ethnic studies as such was not enough. It needed gender and women's studies, right? Gender studies couldn't be enough without taking sexuality seriously, transgender issues and so forth and so on. And a class was not enough to just be a Marxist, right? You had to include gender, feminist critiques of class, reproduction, and so forth and so on. And what I see as a scholar and as an educator and as an administrator, because I've done all of those things, is that, this is a pretty good option, where again, thinking about transborder studies. And right now, if it's ethnic and gender, right, within those categories, there's room to include. There will always be a critique about what is not, selected. So I just want to make the point that, who's at the margin, who's at the center is also relative and needs to be examined. But some people would say, right, that people who look like me or people who are non-white are really at the center of power, right? They will always say that's why they're resisting us. So it's not that they see us as at the margins, right? Many of them see us as a threat, precisely, because we're not at the margins anymore. And I don't see ethnic studies as being represented only as from the margins. But analytically, we need to understand the history of all of those relations. And only border studies, in a broad sense, as is being, I think, addressed here. And I'll say it again, this is about the future of higher education. I agree with what's been said. It's about the future of our society, but not just American society. Not just, it's much more than that. But I'm very proud of being, obviously, having been trained in the US, because my teachers were in the 60s, they were part of the 60s movement themselves. My feminist teachers in Madison were being challenged by the senior guys in their departments. And that was in '85, 10 years after the second wave. And these were white women who were, and then women of color came and criticized, anyway, my point is that all of those histories are there, and I think those are what constitute, at this point, a border studies, transborder studies framework where there's multiple borders being, understood, and I think constitute humanity in that way. So I think we're pretty close to where we want to be. Anyway, I'm sorry for the time.
Thank you so much. No, I think we'll be able to continue this conversation this afternoon, so thank you for your comments. And we have 3 questions, and then we need to go on to the next part of our program.
Is this on? It says it's on. Does that work? Okay. I hate microphones. My question's to the whole panel. I'm here representing a group that is all Latina. And there's a lot of fear since November with my group because a lot of them have to go back and forth, and there's paperwork issues, and constantly I'm telling them, oh, it's going to be all right, just make sure you do this, make sure you do that. And I'm telling them, if you keep standing up, and if you register to vote, and if you do this, and you do this, and do things to come together to try to make change, life will get better. And I'm asking the panel, what advice do you have for young people that are facing newer issues with crossing our border back and forth, and how it could possibly get better? Thank you.
Loaded question. And this is just coming from a tribal perspective because we deal a lot with documentation here within the United States, just dealing with CIBs, who is classified as Native American and who isn't, who has rights to land permits. And so there's a lot of undocumented, at least in our community, undocumented Navajos, meaning that they're unable for certain reasons to get those kinds of paperwork and documents. And what I tell those students is to, it kind of leads a lot to the previous question, which was what stuck to me was about loss and the fear of loss of identity, the fear of loss of culture, the fear of loss of privileges, is that it comes down to the individual self-motivation. And what happens with that individual self-motivation, as everybody can clearly see here at this summit, is that they flock together. All individuals who have the same type of motivation or the same type of inspiration, even if it's through that fear, right, come together. And it's what you decide to do with that fear and how you decide to respond with that fear that kind of reaction is how it's going to mediate, what is going to finally determine in which direction those kinds of issues go. So with those young students that are here that do deal with that, and on a daily basis, I know it's a constant struggle. That's what you have to take a look at it. Well, how am I going to face it? Am I going to take this with a positive self-motivating attitude, or am I going to look at myself as a victim? Because if you look at yourself as a victim, that's where you're going to start hitting more blocks starting from the center, and then it's going to build out from the community, build outwards to the community. So as hard as it is, and I'm not the most optimistic person out there, you have to keep that self-motivation going, and you have to make sure that you're self-sufficient, because once you become self-sufficient, your community around you also is able to maintain that self-sufficiency.
Thank you. So I've been told we're like about half an hour off schedule. So I'm so sorry, Brooke and Frank, but maybe we're going to have a 10-minute break, but maybe you can approach the panelists and talk to them one-on-one. Would that work? Okay. So if you can please be back, everybody, by 10:50, 10-minute break. Restrooms are down the hallway if you like, and then there's some more goodies to enjoy. Thank you very much.
Mike, can I get a PowerPoint graphic? Ready on screen? I gotta go look for some other stuff online. Okay, well, it's not my stuff. Can you?